Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome to this week's episode of the Podiatry Legends podcast. The podcast designed to help you feel, see, and think differently about the podiatry profession. With me today is a legend who is not a podiatrist. His name is Paul Kinkaid, and he is an executive leadership coach. And he is a former Commando-trained Lieutenant Colonel in the British Army. And today we're going to talk about how private practice owners need to step into the leadership domain if they want to thrive. So, Paul, good morning. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Hey, thanks for having me, Tyson. Delighted to be here.
One question I've got to ask is Australia and Britain says Lieutenant Colonel, but America says Lieutenant Colonel. Why the difference? Or is it just a pronunciation?
It's a pronunciation. It's because it's a spelling, isn't it? And we say it as it's spelt or as it originally decided to be said, and the Americans say it phonetically, so it's L-I-E-U, and they say Lou. It's just a matter of phonetics.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I often wondered. It was I was only at something recently in Cairns, and there was some guys from the Australian Army there, and I was talking to them, and one of them, they were an Army band, which I didn't realize. When you join the Army band, you actually auditioned for the band while you were still a civilian. I don't know if that works the same over there.
Exactly the same.
Yeah. And I thought, no, you join the Army because you want to be in the Army. Then they find out, oh my God, you play the guitar. Oh, you're a good singer. Hey, you should join the band. But these guys actually applied to join the Army band as a civilian, auditioned for the band, got in, then they do the military training.
Yeah, exactly
afterwards.
the same.
Yeah. And so I asked them, what's the highest rank you can go in the military band? And Lieutenant Colonel, they said, was probably about as high as you could probably go.
Yeah, I think it's about the same here for a musician. And then they get, other cap badges, go in and command the Corps of Army Music or whatever that might be, up to full colonel.
So yeah, I thought it was quite interesting. I didn't realize that's how they actually did it. And I must admit, they were bloody good too. They're a really good band.
They are good. Yeah, they're multidisciplined.
Yeah, and that's why. And there was somebody else that was there who was a medical student, and he said, "Do you reckon these guys would do? We have like a big party at the end of the year. They come in and do it for us." I said, "I'm not going to ask them." And they're based in. And a friend of mine, he's doing medicine in Townsville, and the Army band is actually based in Townsville, and they travel around from there. So it said you'd probably be able to line them up.
Great, why not?
So anyway, we're not here to talk about music. I get off track very easy. So let's run through executive leadership coaching and how that applies to podiatry. And we're going to talk about another thing, that you have a model that is called forensic leadership, which I love the term, and we have spoken about it prior, and I think it's brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I think all across private healthcare, leadership has never really been a thing, particularly. Private healthcare starts generally with an expert clinician who's got an entrepreneurial spirit and can see that they can make money on their dream job, and they get into that and they start doing it, and they start doing it really well. And then the more they do it well, the more people hear through word of mouth, and the more people come. And then all of a sudden, your patient list is longer than you can actually deliver. So you have to start taking other people on.
Yeah.
And then, you get admin, you get other clinical staff, and then all of a sudden you've got a team, and the team needs leading. And that was, it was not uncommon before COVID, but then COVID came along. And I know in the UK, people couldn't get into the NHS. People couldn't go to routine GP appointments. They couldn't go to, normal hospital appointments. Surgeries were cancelled. And therefore, people then turned to what they thought previously was an inaccessible, expensive private healthcare profession, and realized all of a sudden, hang on, this is much more accessible than we thought it was in terms of price, in terms of availability. I can get to see a professional clinician for 40 minutes rather than 15 minutes. And generally they're on time.
So this is the thinking in the UK. See, in Australia, majority of podiatrists graduate and go into private practice. They work for other practitioners. I know the USA, they do go to podiatry school, and then that's the word that I'm looking for. Can't remember the word that I'm looking for. But then most of them will go into same thing, private practice. Some will work in hospitals, I'm sure.
Sure.
But the UK, it's a lot of people, they graduate and they go into the NHS. It's sort of like an expectation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But, you know, any clinician, they just couldn't get access through COVID to the NHS. So across all of private healthcare, and I know specifically we're looking at podiatry here, but it became much more accessible. People realized that appointment costs weren't as extravagant as they thought they were, weren't as pricey, and they got expert clinical advice rather than from a GP, from an expert, which was just much higher protein. And therefore, even more people came along, more clinicians were required to deal with the patient list, more admin to support that. The teams got bigger, growth in private practice happened. And then all of a sudden, the person who started it, the director, the owner, the practice, you know, the clinician who started it with that entrepreneurial spirit now has to do the thing they never planned for, which is lead others.
And I just want to, oh, sorry, no, keep going.
No, go for it. No, well, it's different to managing. You know, you can manage processes, you can manage an appointment book, you can manage symptoms, but leadership is very, very different thing to management.
Yeah. And I'll just point out to everyone too, that your partner is a podiatrist. So you're very close to the profession at the moment.
That's right. Yeah. In fact, I think you had her on a little while ago, Emily Ball. Yeah.
Yes. Episode 222. Emily Ball was practice resilience. So that was just a couple of weeks ago. So if people haven't listened, if people missed that episode, go back and listen to that episode, because I think we do mention that you were coming on.
She's got an incredible story as well. So if people haven't listened to it, they should definitely go back and listen to her story.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I was going to ask about leadership is, if somebody is a solo practitioner, say they're just setting up their business, they don't, and they, you know, there's a lot of people in Australia when they're first setting up their practice won't get a receptionist. They will just do everything themselves. They're a solo practitioner, and I mean, solo is very solo. Yeah. Should they be looking at leadership then, or should they be looking at leadership once they start employing, have their first employee, whether it's a receptionist, another podiatrist?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think they should be looking at, so most leaders start with self-awareness, and you can never be overly self-aware.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that they probably do need a coach, and if that's a leadership coach, then so be it. But coaching would help with that self-awareness. And if you're more aware of leadership in the round, then you're going to be a better leader when you need to start that leadership. You might as well learn the lessons that other people have learned by studying leadership and by talking about leadership, than make those mistakes at the outset and have to learn them yourself. You know, I've done a lot of leadership. I've, you know, commanded elite teams, 44 countries, 5 continents, over 20 years in the military. Yeah, which is great. But if I only used my experience, which is not insignificant, but it would still be extremely arrogant. That's why I read prolifically about other leaders, about other people. I bring, albeit confidentiality, I bring in the experiences of other clients if it fits in a situation of someone I'm dealing with.
I think that's a really good point.
The more you can understand, the better.
Yeah, what I've found amazing, the people I know who are the best leaders are constantly studying leadership, which I think is amazing, because here you go, you've got people who are leadership coaches and they still know that there's more to know about leadership, and then you get other people that go, oh no, I don't really need to learn about leadership because I'm just a natural born leader. And I'm like, just because you were captain of the football team doesn't make you a great leader. It makes you a good football player, and it might make you a good leader of 13 people on a football field. That doesn't necessarily always translate to real life and business.
And all those people have got the same point of reference, because they've got the same very relatively narrow interest and, you know, set, and they're operating as a team anyway. Not that podiatrists don't operate as a team in a single clinic, but people have got different frames of reference. They've been brought up differently. Different journeys have brought them into podiatry, and therefore they're looking for different things. So one person might be, you know, motivated by finance. Someone might be motivated by being part of a team and being able to help people. Someone might be genuinely very giving, and you've got those 3 different character types within the same clinic. Yeah,
and I think that's important too. And I think that's the new business owner when you first start out. And I think first you're trying to lead yourself, because if you can't control yourself, it's going to be hard to sort of lead other people as well.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think a lot of new business owners think everybody is motivated by money, which is a bad way of thinking, because some people know they just want lifestyle, they want experiences, they want good mentorship. And then there's other people that want money. It's a little bit further down the rung than what we expect.
Yeah, and you know, if you look at most people who work in a team, they want to be led. And the thing is, if you haven't had any formal leadership training, or you haven't studied it informally and read about it more widely, all you can use is your own experience to date, which may have been touched by bad leaders, what I call people who leave red traces behind, which we can explore in a bit. But if you're only role modeling that which you've experienced, so I think there's two things in early leadership. One is role modeling, and that's, you know, the copying or taking elements of people you've seen before, which could be good, could be bad. And the other is role playing. People behave in a manner in which they think a leader should be, which is invariably, right, I've got to know everything, I've got to be the decision maker, I've got to be strong, when actually most of the best leaders I know are always learning, as we mentioned before. They're always curious, they're always asking questions. They'll put their hand up and say when they don't know. They'll be appropriately vulnerable and say they don't know something, or they're scared or whatever. You know, many times in the military, I would say to my soldiers, I don't know what to do here. What do you think?
Yeah.
And because they've been in experiences, or, you know, you just get multiple heads on one problem. I've used the term before. It's supremely arrogant to think you've got the best head in the clinic.
Yeah, I did a video some time ago, and it was something just about there's no stupid questions. There's no such thing as stupid questions. I used to jokingly say there's no such thing as stupid questions, just stupid people. And and that used to be because somebody did ask you a question that seemed a bit odd. But what I've learned from that was, and then I did a bit of reading about asking questions, and they said, no, that there is no dumb question, because if you don't know something, you're better to ask the question, hey, I don't know that, even though you just assume that I do, but I don't know that. And if you tell me how to do it, I won't make a mistake. But the arrogance is to go, I know, or the stupid part is to not ask the question and then go and stuff it up. And then how does that, what are the repercussions from not asking that question? So I would much rather people just constantly ask me questions about things and at least get the answer that may finish with a good outcome and not a bad outcome.
Yeah, exactly. By not answering the question, then you get what I call the law of unintended consequences. You know, you go and do what you think was the right thing, and the ripple effect is that it magnifies into a very, very bad thing. And you could have overcome that right at the outset by asking the question.
They're like the old Benny Hill. Remember the Benny Hill skit? Don't assume, because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me.
Exactly.
I saw that as a kid, and because my dad used to remind me of Benny Hill. And it was very similar to Benny Hill, same sort of mannerisms and all that. So it was a fun house. So as kids, we just grew up watching Benny Hill, and always remember, never assume, because you make an ass out of you and me. Now, if people,
there's a certain truism in that.
There is.
For sure.
So with what you learned in the military, and I take it that, like we were talking about before, just because someone is a leader in one area doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a leader in another. So you don't get someone who joins the military who's a private, but just because they were the captain of Liverpool, they're going to be allowed to lead 200 men into battle. A little bit different. So what were the steps of leadership that you went through to get to where you are now?
Well, so I joined the military directly as an officer. So I went through the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, a year-long leadership course. And they talk a lot about servant leadership. In fact, their motto is serve to lead, i.e. give yourself to those around you, which is great up to a point, as long as you understand the theory in detail. But a lot of people mistake servant leadership for servile leadership. And the risk there is if you imagine that, you know, you've got someone working for you who has a problem, rather than trying to get them to step up into that problem space and coach them up so that they enjoy a growth mindset and personal growth and professional growth, someone who mistakenly applies servant leadership will step down into the problem space and help them solve it. Then no one grows.
Okay.
So there's a risk associated with servant leadership. You don't fully understand it. Now, as an overarching principle, it's great. But I was also very humble. You know, you get some people come out and they, right, I'm the boss, you're going to do what I tell you. And you've had a year of leadership training, you know, you're still
Yeah.
dripping behind the ears, never mind wet. And that's when it goes wrong. Whereas I would go in and I know a lot of my colleagues did the same thing and say, look, I might be responsible and accountable for the decisions, but I need you to help me. If you can see that I'm going to trip, let me know. You're more experienced than I am. You know, when I took over my first platoon, which is in Bosnia, in 98, I was the least experienced person in my platoon. All of the soldiers who were all junior in rank to me had more experience.
They've been there, done that.
We've done it twice already. Let's go for the, you know, strike three. How arrogant would it have been of me to go in and say, right, I'm the boss, you do what I tell you now?
Yeah.
Ridiculous. They'd have stepped back, and anytime they see a trip hazard come in, they'd have just kept their mouth shut and not said anything.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Let me trip. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Let me trip. So I learned on the job, so to speak. And then I started, you know, I had a profound incident where a soldier I was involved in an explosion. I talk about it in a TED talk that I did last year. And one of the soldiers who was my driver died in the incident. And it was an awful incident. But that demonstrated to me that leadership I knew it wasn't all about tell already, but it profoundly changed the way that I viewed leadership, and care became the key principle for me. And, you know, I truly believe my central philosophy is great leadership comes from a position of care. So if you don't genuinely care about those people around you, I would contend you're not leading them. You might be managing them, and you might be managing them incredibly well, but you're not leading them until you care. I think it was Theodore Roosevelt said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that is another truism.
It's true though. They always say people that if someone really cares about you, you will go to the end of the earth with them. You'll go into battle with them because you know they care about you and they care about the outcome. Whereas if someone is an arrogant leader and you know they don't give a rat's about you, all they care about is getting the job done because it will reflect on them and they will look good by getting it done. You won't go into battle with them because you're thinking, hang on, it's too risky. Not going to do it.
Yeah, it's the difference between doing that which is required by the job spec and to get the money at the end of the month versus discretionary effort. If you are cared for, the ripple effect is that you then vicariously care for those around you as well, but you also put in the extra effort to go the extra mile and you know, dig a bit deeper. Okay,
so taking this, how does this apply to the podiatrist that's in their clinic? And we're going to assume there's podiatrists there, they're solo practitioners. There's going to be podiatrists who have just a receptionist, or we're going to have podiatrists that have 6 podiatrists working for them, multiple clinics, and they really need to not just manage their team, but they need to lead their team. How does this apply to podiatry?
In so many ways. If we take the simple orders process in the military, now lots of people think the military is all about command and control and orders. It's not. It's about, within that orders process, the commander, the leader, paints a picture, and they call it their intent. So it's my intent to do this, that, and the other. Whereas if the practice owner has an intent, a plan, a strategy, a desired end state, a purpose, a why, lots of different names for it, I call it intent. But if they can paint that picture in a compelling narrative that everyone else understands where they're heading and what part they play in that plan, guess what happens? People stop knocking on the door of the practice owner saying, oh, I was going to do this. Is that okay? I was going to do that. What do you think?
Yeah.
Instead of creating followers, you create leaders. And that's a massive difference. Followers come and knock on the door and say, what do you think to this, Tyson? What do you think to that? Can I do this? I was thinking about spending this on the marketing budget. What do you think? Whereas if you explain as the clinical lead, or not the clinical lead, as the practice owner, where you want to get to, people know that their decisions are getting you a step closer to that intent, and they make decisions within their function. They start to own their function. And then, just like a guy, David Marquette, says in his book, which is called Turn the Ship Around, great book.
Yeah.
They come to you and say, Tyson, I intend to do this with the marketing budget. And you go, yeah, okay, crack on. And that gives you space to then lead. The start point for most leaders is you don't have time to lead. You know, because you've got to do your clinical stuff, you've got to help out on admin, you've got to help here, help there. Where on earth do I find the time to lead? Create leaders around you, and that creates space in the diary, and it creates space in the mind to be more strategic and think and look over the horizon and plan.
That is so good. I remember I mentioned to you that I was at an event where I had lunch with Jocko Willink. And I remember when he was doing his talk and he mentioned that whole intent, and he gave a really good example. And when he said it, I went, I'm going to get you to give some examples as well. But what he explained to us was they were told that they had to get to a particular building in this area in Afghanistan, I think it was, so that they could see a certain distance. There was something about this building. So the intent was to set up a lookout in this building so they could see the Afghanistan people coming from a particular direction into this town. That was the intent. Bang, they went through all this thing, went through all this drama. They got there. The building they were supposed to go in on the map was no longer there. It had been blown up.
Yeah.
Now, if people didn't, then when they saw that, they stopped and they went, what was the purpose of this mission? What was our intent? To find the highest point so that we could view the enemy coming. So their intent never changed. All of a sudden, well, that building's not there. Well, what's the next highest building in the same spot? They went to that one, set up the lookout, and the job was done. Whereas people that don't have that type of leadership will go, oh, no building here. Looks like this mission's a failure. And they turn around and go home.
Yeah.
And they forget what
exactly.
because the intent was never explained to them. If everyone was just following him without them all knowing, no, this is what the mission is. But I think it's also important too, if the leader is not there and injured or something happens, the rest of the team needs to still know what the intent was to get the job done.
Do you know, and that is a fundamental difference between leadership development in the military and leadership development outside. The military, although it's very rare, the boss could be shot on the battlefield. That's what we train for. We train for operations. And if the boss is shot on the battlefield and he or she has the plan in their head and nowhere else, the plan dies with them. Everyone else is, the proverbial mushroom. Whereas if you've communicated that plan and everyone knows the part in the plan, and we train leaders 2 levels above their rank in the military, then they can step into those shoes with relative ease, not necessarily, dead easy.
Yeah.
But the same is in clinical practice, the same is in industry, the same is in the charity sector, in the public sector. If we start to train everyone in our organization to be leaders of their own function, then if for one, and you communicate what the intent is, or the purpose, or the why, or the whatever you want to call it, if you communicate that in a compelling way and they understand it and they know what part they play in it, you don't need to be there. And the building doesn't need to be there, because they'll get to the high point to see over the horizon or whatever it is they've got to do. Or they'll get, if they understand the priority for the next quarter or the next 6 months is to increase footfall and get more patients into the clinic, everyone works to that priority. If the next priority is, now we've got to increase the billing, the average value of each patient, we've got the right patient numbers, now we've got to increase the turnover and the revenue by increasing the billing, then they start to do that. Yeah.
And this is where I know some podiatrists may be listening to this and go, oh, but I'm not a salesperson. And this isn't about selling, it's about leading.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is absolutely about leadership. And, I train people in leadership, I've coached people in leadership, but I've got to do that by example now. One of the most important leadership roles we have that no one is ever trained for is parenting.
Oh yeah, I know.
And yet no one says, oh, that's not my job. I haven't been trained for that.
Yeah. I'm not a salesperson. Okay. But
No.
you got a partner. So obviously you're a salesperson at least once.
You
sold them on marrying you. So you are a salesperson. You had to sell yourself. So that's where I think there's confusion. I think the whole leadership part of, with podiatry, I think some people become, there's a guy, Tony Gavin, that mentioned it, they become accidental business owners. It's because they work for somebody else and they just think it's the progression through their career that, I must have my own business. Whereas I think some people shouldn't have their own business. They're probably better to stay as an employee and be led by somebody, and they're probably going to have a more enjoyable career.
Yeah, sure.
But most will take that progression and I'm going to have my own business. And I think they just assume the leadership is going to happen just automatically. But I think it is something you have to keep trying to learn more about.
It's a battle, you know. For me, I'll be honest, it's a battle to try and convince some people that they need leadership development, because they, no, I know how to lead. Do you really? Okay, how do you do that? Oh, well, I just do this and that, and okay. Well, what you're talking about there is you're managing processes, or one of the phrase, you know, you're leaving red traces on people, and that's only going to serve to push them further away.
Okay, now that's the third time, or the second time I've heard you mention red traces. So let's jump over to red traces. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so this is part of the forensic leadership theory that I've developed over the last sort of 24 years. So everyone understands forensic science, and there's a set, you know, you leave fingerprints behind, you leave footprints behind, and there's this central theory by a guy called Dr. Edmond Lecard. He was French. Not that you understand that from the accent.
No, it's funny that you mentioned that. I actually have this up on a post-it note here. See?
There we go.
Dr. Edmond Lecard, French criminologist. Every contact leaves a trace.
Yeah. Was that from a TED talk? Did you write
know how I got that? Yeah, that was from your TED talk. When I watched your TED talk, I went, that guy sounds really, really interesting. And it was called Lecard's exchange principle. So I went and looked it up and did a bit of reading on it. And I found that really, really interesting.
So look, we know bad people go to prison because they leave a trace behind them. And Lecard exchange principle says every contact leaves a trace. Now, whether that is the fingerprint, the DNA, a footprint, fibers from the criminal's clothing on the crime scene, or even the victim, that's one thing. But also the crime scene leaves a trace on the criminal. That might be a fleck of paint, a scratch from the glass, the victim's DNA, carpet fibers, whatever. That trace is there. Whether human forensic scientists can find it or not is irrelevant. The trace is there. If you lift that entire theory up and drop it into the leadership domain, it remains constant. So, well, even in the relationship domain, not necessarily leadership, but every time we have an interaction with someone else, i.e., a relationship, we leave a trace. Now that can be a good, positive green trace, or it can be a whacking negative red trace.
I remember watching a TV show. It was a TV show or it was a movie or something like that. And they said exactly that every crime that occurs is solvable because there is evidence there. And somebody said, well, why isn't every crime solved? And they said, because of sloppy police work. They said that the evidence is there, but they said sometimes you get that many people that are they're walking over it's right. It is there. You just got to find it. But it's not always that easy because you get so many people that end up on a site. Now, I'm sure it's a lot.
Yeah. You know, of course, crime scenes get contaminated. You know, you can have the best police in the world, but if the piece of evidence is so minuscule and minute that it takes whatever it is to find it, and you haven't got that piece of kit, then you're not going to find it. You know, but the trace in humans is there, and we know it's there because we feel it. Now, the last set of stats I've got is for 2019, which is that pre-COVID when the world started spinning in the opposite direction or whatever happened.
Bloody COVID.
But yeah, exactly. But in 2019 in the UK, of those people who voluntarily left their jobs, just under 80%, 79% of them cited a lack of recognition as one of the key reasons why they left their job. So that's not a red trace being left. That's a lack of green.
Yeah.
So people are leaving their jobs because we're not caring. We're not recognizing them, and we're not being transparent enough. And those are the three guiding principles of forensic leadership. One, lead from a position of care. Two, notice people, and where appropriate, give recognition, or notice when people are struggling and lean in and help out. That's when the leader gets their hands dirty and gets back on the tools, or mentors or whatever. And the third one, which we've already spoken about, is be appropriately transparent, i.e. communicate your intent, your vision, your purpose, your strategy in a compelling way that everyone understands their part in the plan. And therefore, they're going to get on board.
I like that number 2 about getting your hands dirty, though. It's
You've got to, as a leader, you've got to be prepared to muck in.
Yeah, I had one of my best bosses that I ever had. This was outside of podiatry. When I was a student, I used to work on a chook farm, killing chickens. And the chickens, after they were killed, used to go in this big ice vat that was probably about 8 meters long. So they'd churn through this ice vat, and this would kill the bacteria, and they'd pop out the other end. And my job was to stick my hands in the ice vat and pull the chickens out once I got to the end. Very cold. My arms would be numb. Awful job. Anyways, one day a chicken got stuck in the vat, which stopped the whole thing from churning. The vat was about 5 foot deep of just bloody icy water.
Oof, disgusting.
All of a sudden, everyone's looking around going, someone has to go in there and get that chicken out. All of a sudden, everybody's looking at me because I was a new guy. So they usually sent the new guy in. But the owner of the business just happened to be there at the time. And he went, I couldn't ask anyone to do something I'm not prepared to do myself. Ripped his gear off. Now, this guy was worth so much money. Ripped his gear off down to his jocks. They tied a bit of rope around because in case he got stuck.
Yeah.
Dove in there. He was under there for only about 8 seconds. Came out. They dragged him out. He was blue. He was that cold. But I tell you, the respect he got from everybody in that factory was just like, he had the right to send anybody into there and do that, but he went in and actually did it himself. And to me, that was just like, that was great leadership that particular day. The respect he got from everyone was amazing.
And you and I have both seen the flip side of that coin. Someone who gets so successful in private practice that they can then go on holiday all year round. They can raise the glass to Instagram and all that kind of stuff. And guess what happens? They're not getting their hands dirty, and people start to leave because they're not leading anymore. They're actually they're riding on the back of the other people, and they see that as a whacking red trace that's left. So your guy, ironically, who jumped into, all the blood and all the red, in doing so, became blue, but left a massive green trace on everybody.
Oh, it was and I've taken that on board my whole career, that I've never asked anybody in my business to do something I have not done myself. I have swept the floors. I have mopped. I've cleaned the toilets. I have done everything. And even when I had the business and my wife and I were there working, we would still just do those small things. I'd empty a bin. I didn't have a problem with emptying a bin if it was full or doing anything else.
Yeah. Do you know, there's a phrase, you're going to love this, because it was the head of the Australian Defence Force who came out with it, and it's gone global. And he said, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept.
Yeah.
If you just think about that for a second, if you walk past a piece of litter, or if you walk past someone who's using inappropriate language in an open space in the practice where patients can hear it, and don't say anything, you're then complicit in that behavior.
A friend of mine, we always jokingly say that we're singing from the same hymn sheet. Yeah. And because in all my talks that I do, and when I do my marketing workshops and the 12-week reboot, I usually say, you get what you tolerate. So
exactly that.
If there's a piece of paper there, and that used to be one of our rules and a part of our values, was if you walk past a piece of paper that's on the floor, you stop and you pick it up. You don't walk past it, especially when it's really obvious. Yeah, it's doing those small things consistently.
Do you know, I've got another phrase, and I use it at home as well as in work and stuff. Is you've got to sweat the small stuff. You've got to look at the details, especially when you're in business. The numbers, etc., because it's the details that will kill you. That comes from, obviously that's a bit strong in private practice, but it's the details that will bite you in the arse.
It's true though.
It really bite you. Yeah, it is. They're the if anyone out there is a parent and they've trodden on the small piece of Lego, the impact of the small things.
Oh yeah,
it's
but
immense.
It like you said before, some business owners think they can get to a certain point of, I've got all these people working for me. I don't need to be at the clinic anymore. I can go and live this fantastic life. And I've always told people, no matter how big your business becomes or how much money you're making, you still need to be involved in your business.
Definitely.
And I told you, I think when we were talking prior, that there was a physiotherapist that I knew who had 11 physios working for her, massive clinic, everything was going great. So she decides to pack up and move to the Gold Coast. And then
Yeah.
next thing, all these photos, every week there were photos that she's posting. Oh, another beautiful morning. And you saw a coffee and the surf in the background and just looked absolutely gorgeous. And I remember watching these pictures coming through and I'm going, I wonder how long it's going to be before there's a mutiny at her clinic, because people are thinking,
Yeah.
why are we here working our asses off and she's sitting down on the Gold Coast living this magnificent life? And one by one, they went from 11, I think, almost down to 4. She came back, has to work now full time, and the practice has never gotten back up to where it was because she dropped the ball.
And when you start to lead badly like that, she wasn't leading that individual you just mentioned, but when you start to do that, guess who leaves your organization first? It's the good people, because they back themselves to get a job elsewhere. They know,
and that's what they did.
And therefore you're left with the less good people.
That's exactly what happened.
The less good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because the people that were pretty average, they stayed because they're going, well, where else am I going to go?
Exactly.
But a couple of them, I think 1 or 2 ended up setting up their own practice in opposition, and then some of the others who left went and worked for them over the next 12 to 18 months, and others just went to some of the better physio clinics where the business owner was there. Doesn't mean they were there from 6 in the morning to 6 at night, but they were there. They were there driving that practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the key thing. You've got to be visible, and you've got to be accessible. And if you're not visible and accessible, then you're not leading.
I always say someone's got to drive the bus.
Absolutely right.
You have to have a bus driver, or the bus is just a big box of wheels. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what I'm doing more and more of now, is stepping into the private practice. In fact, with Emily, we mentioned her earlier on, we're not only partners in life, we're now partners in business, and we're starting to develop leadership across the private practice in the UK to start with. And then the plan is to grow that and do more online virtual training workshops that can go global and help everyone with Emily's background. And episode, was it 222 you said?
Yeah, episode 222. And it was titled Practice Resilience.
That's it. If they listen to hers, you find out, what's made her the great clinical leader that she is, and then brought in my leadership stuff, and we smashed it together, and we've got to the same end state, which is, that we're now starting to deliver that training.
Yeah. So with forensic,
start with,
So with what was that term you had before? The forensic
leadership.
Forensic leadership. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
So with your forensic leadership, what are there certain steps or certain things that you run through with that podiatrists should be doing?
Yeah. So you've got to pay attention to the guiding principles to start off with, and you've got to really consider the traces. Stop and think about the traces. So there's this really great thing that comes together. So it comes from the world of coaching, and there's 4 key questions to this. And it's, if you're going to do something, whatever it might be, and it gets confusing, so hold on tight and scream if you want to go faster here.
Yeah.
What will happen if I do it?
Yep.
And you think about that. What won't happen if I do it? Okay, that starts to get a bit harder. What will happen if I don't do it? Okay, if I don't do it, then I will reduce my revenue, for example.
Yeah.
And then the real spiky one that really starts to screw with your head is what won't happen if I don't do it?
Good question.
Because your brain has to work through that in so much detail, then the magic starts to happen behind, because it's like a double negative, and you start to work through that. But then the answer to all those questions, you then put that through the forensic leadership filter of what green traces are going to be left and what red traces are going to be left, i.e. what is the impact on my people?
Yeah.
Then you know what the right decision is. So lots of people make a decision just on a whim without the right level of data, and that's okay. We can't always have the right level of data, but what we can always do is consider the impact our decisions are going to have on our people. And if that's going to be a big red trace, then stop and do it a different way.
Yeah, and I love the terminology you're using with green traces and red traces. Green, good, because I mentioned to you before as well, when I was doing my marketing workshops, it was like podiatry marketing, success leaves clues.
Yeah.
And in one of the slides, I said, well, I could have actually called this podiatry marketing. I can't remember the exact terminology that I used, but just saying that every successful podiatrist leaves clues, which are those green traces.
Yeah.
But every unsuccessful podiatrist also leaves clues, which are those red traces. So if you want to know what to do, you just got to follow good examples as well.
Sure. And part of the beauty of forensic leadership is, in organizations, we've so rarely talk about leadership. We never say, "Oh, Paul, that boss Paul? Yeah, what a chump, awful leader." You don't say that out loud.
Yeah.
Whereas with forensic leadership, what you can say is, if you and I are in a meeting and I say something that leaves a red trace on you, you can say in a jocular way in the meeting, "Oof, Paul, that was a bit red." And then I get an alert. It just softens. It takes the edge off that conversation. Or if it's a heavier red, you can come out afterwards and say, "Paul, when you said that thing in the meeting, it left a pretty big red trace, mate. Can we, I wonder if we set some time aside to talk about that."
That is fantastic, because a lot of times employees or team members don't know how to approach the boss.
No.
So just approaching them and saying, "Oh, that comment was a little bit red," straight away as a leader, I'll be going, "Oh shit, I don't want to leave red traces. I just want to keep leaving green traces."
Exactly.
And I'm sure anyone that's worked for me is listening to this going, "Oh my God, Tyson, there was a lot of red traces you left behind."
Sometimes we do that, but also, when you get up, is it habit stacking? When you get up in the morning, you're brushing your teeth, you can think, right, which version of me has got up? If I'm grumpy, sometimes we get up grumpy, don't we? Sometimes we get cut up on the way into work by some, chump on the motorway, the highway, on the road. And that sets your mindset into a negative space. Therefore, you're more likely to leave red traces. If you're self-aware enough, you can go, okay, I either need to communicate I'm grumpy to my team, and therefore forgive me if I might be clumsy and leave a red, or through self-regulation and self-awareness, I need to take myself out, take a breath, have a coffee, and then start again.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing, the awareness, though. You've got to be aware of what your actions are. Like asking yourself that morning, how am I feeling? How am I going to go into work today? I did a quote just some time ago, and it said, is my attitude today contagious?
Yeah.
And
it can be for the wrong reasons as well, can't it, though?
Yeah. And I've seen that. And I know some days that I would go into work and I wasn't mentally at my best. And you could see the impact it had on everybody. And I know other days when I've gone in there, I mean, really at my best, and you could see everybody else had a great day as well.
Yeah. I think that most people lead by default. They have their own default way of leading. What I'm suggesting through forensic leadership, and I've just finished a first draft of the forensic leadership book.
I'm looking forward to that coming out.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Is for leadership to be, and this is a Venn diagram of terms. They all mean the same sort of thing, but they resonate and they sort of propel one another into the thought mind. Is make leadership deliberate, conscious, and intentional. If we can bring leadership into that domain, then we're not leading by default anymore. We're stopping and thinking about the way we lead. We're stopping and thinking about the traces we leave upon other people and the traces that are left upon us and how we own those. And that's got to enhance leadership around us. If you combine that with a compelling narrative that gives the intent in a clear, compelling way, then by God, have you got a team that is tight, that is caring for one another. They're going to have each other's backs. They're going to know that when they get to Jocko Willink's site and the building isn't there, that actually they've got to get to the high ground, rather than, do you know what? I don't know what to do now because we weren't told what to do.
That's
Create
fantastic.
leaders around you and they will lead. That
is fantastic, because it goes back to a comment I think I made earlier, or maybe I just thought it was, when some people, they say, oh, they're just a born leader. So you're saying that person who is referred to as a born leader is just doing leadership by default based on what they know, whereas a true leader is actually a vulnerable person. They're leading, but they're aware that they need awareness, they need intent, they need to really be thinking about their leadership that day, not just hey, I'm a born leader, so I'm just going to make all the right decisions today. There needs to be a thought process constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's got to be deliberate. You know,
Yeah.
you've got to. We so rarely stop and think about leadership and the way we're leading and the impact it has, that if we do that, the benefit of spending that time in that space is immeasurable. The benefits are huge. So for people to say, oh, I haven't got time to lead,
Yeah.
give it a go. Give it a go for a fortnight. Stop and be intentional about your leadership and see the benefits that happen at the end of that fortnight. And you will never go back to not leading again.
That is fantastic advice. So, Paul, if people want to reach out to you, what is the best way of doing that? If they want to learn more, contact with you, connect with you in some way?
Look, the best way is on LinkedIn. I'm Paul Kinkaid. Look me up. I'm on there. My business is just rebranding. So within the next week or two, you can look me up on forensicoutcomes.com. Paul@forensicoutcomes.com will get through to me. Or paul@leadingpractice.co.uk. I'll answer any one of those emails. Reach out. Let's have a chat about leadership and let me know what your leadership challenges are.
That is fantastic. So, Paul, I want to thank you for coming on the Podiatry Legends podcast and sharing all this leadership knowledge. I think it's an area of podiatry that if we can create more leaders in the podiatry profession, then we will actually lead the whole profession a lot stronger. And I think that's part of what some of the people that are in leadership roles in the profession itself, associations, boards, and all that, I hope they're listening to this, because I think leadership is required everywhere, not just in our practice, the whole professions, the societies, like I said, the associations, the boards. There needs to be leadership across the board. So, Paul, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, Tyson.
Hey, cheers. Thanks.